And welcome to the Year We Started podcast. It's a podcast born Phoenix-like from the ashes of last year's podcast. What are we supposed to do now? We're knuckling up?
We're knuckling up. We are currently knuckling up.
Okay, that's fine. Man, it's been a long time since I've paid attention to what we're doing. This is a podcast born from the ashes of last year's podcast. I already said I am your co-host, Jeff.
I'm the other knuckle up, Nick.
And this is our podcast where a couple of friends that are half a continent apart that would like to come together and talk about some of the things that are fun and interesting to us. Nick, I didn't even preface any of this before we started talking. Did I give you an update on my car situation, maybe in the Patreon last week or anything like that, in text or anything?
My brain may have filtered it out, but I don't believe so.
Okay, so I sent you a text message, though, of my car after.
Okay.
Do you remember this? I told you that we would be talking about it. I sure
my
hope
brain may have filtered everything. I don't know. I apparently I don't even remember the things you texted me.
Okay. I don't even know where we're at then. I'm just going to assume the average listener has the same level of amnesia that we apparently have.
Yeah. That's fine. That's good.
So when we talked last time, I literally went back and double checked. It was when I was posting my car for sale and I was complaining about the fact that I had to post the car for sale because that's stressful and annoying and I'm going to have to talk to people and whatnot. And then I sent you a text of a broken window from a car.
Oh, yeah, you did. You did indeed send me this. And you said we talked about this. Okay, yeah.
We were talking about this on the podcast, and now it's the podcast, and here we are. And I might even do a go back in time, play the audio, where I said, I'm sure it won't be that bad. So I posted it. I paid the $20 or whatever to boost it on the Facebook Marketplace or whatever to sell my stupid van. And Nick,
we talked about that. That's what we talked about on the Patreon. Yes.
Oh, so I said that I boosted it. And then I tried to sell it, and then the city was mowing across the street and accidentally broke out the window of my car. They were mowing and slung a rock through my car window. Side window.
from the street. Yes,
from a mower.
With a mower. There you go.
With a mower, yeah. They were mowing grass because they're doing construction across the street.
Right.
They also admitted to also being the one. I can't remember if I said this either. They also admitted to being the ones that also did the same thing to my truck, which I had previously thought.
What?
I had previously thought was some hooligans that were going through the neighborhood and shooting out the back windows.
You thought that you were unsafe because of just random petty crime. Oh no! But no, in fact, you are actually a target of a Final Destination style plot by your city.
By my city own city mower. Anyways, I had a buyer that was ready to go. They backed out. Since then, I've had another buyer. I've been in the process of trying to get this window replaced. It is the back it's the back driver's side window, and it is in a 2008 vehicle, and they are hard to come by. One of them got delivered to the company that is going to replace it, and we had an appointment together last Tuesday, this Tuesday still. Just they had an appointment 4 days ago or whatever it is. They let me know after the appointment, no called, no showed, that the glass had gotten broken in transit, and they just forgot to tell me. So
they just forgot to tell you.
Thank you. I'm glad that I made sure that I was home for this appointment. That's great. Now they called me here yesterday, Saturday, as we're recording, and they told me they have it again, and they're going to show up on Monday. They're also going to show up on Monday to fix my F-150 glass. Anyways, it's been a whole thing, but a long way to say all of that. Selling a car. I'm now on my third person if they ever respond to me. If they don't respond to me, I'll have to move on to my fourth person. I've sold my car at least 3 times now. And I would really like to just sell it the one time that actually matters. If the companies that could either 1, fix my glass, or 2, not actively be breaking my glass, can just figure their stuff out. So it was not only as bad as I thought it would be, it is significantly worse.
But what I like was it was creatively bad. You know what I mean? I was expecting just like low balls and like people showing up and be like, nah, man, I don't got the money, but I'll trade you this watch. And you'd be like, I don't need a watch. But no. This is like, the like we said, just Final Destination attack on your car.
Funny thing, tried to sell it for $1,000 more than I thought it was worth. Sold it immediately, twice. I did come down $500 off my imaginary price to sell it the third time. I don't know. Maybe the fourth time, Nick, I'll make even more. I don't even know. It's a little bit ridiculous at this point.
I'm sorry. I do find that part of, like, I've never really understood that. I understand the incentive of being like somebody who like lowballs and is like annoying about it. Like they're like, "Hey man, I gotta shoot my shot. Worst case, they say no or whatever." And like that's fine. I'm not no like real shade. I don't actually care about that. But I do think like, why do people like say they want something that not show up or like back out? Like I don't understand that at all.
Or why do people sell things and get their windows bashed out? I mean, everybody's complicated, Nick. Yeah, we all have our vices.
We do.
I just want to tell one more brief glass-related anecdote.
Hit me. I'm here for the glass-related anecdote. That's what I'm here for.
So, like, back in 2017, I bought a nice pair of sunglasses for the first time in my entire life. Mm-hmm. And since then, I have worn them a lot. And back maybe 6 months or so ago, I replaced the lenses on them because I had gotten them into they were in bad shape. I did realize what had happened. I wore them while I was doing weed eating around our house, and it turns out that's a very bad idea to wear nice sunglasses because you will scratch them to heck and back. So they needed to have their lenses replaced. I replaced the lenses, and then like 1 month later, 2 months later, something like that, I was bringing in a package from Amazon, and I laid it down on top of my sunglasses and snapped snapped the frames in half.
Nice.
It's just like first off, I'm a very cheap person by and large, and so like these are like my one like guilty pleasure, and then I spent the money to actually fix them, and then I just immediately snapped them in half. So that was great. That such is life. Oh my
god.
But then I'm like, you know what? I'm the sort of person, I'm stubborn. I'm, like I said earlier, I'm cheap. I'm going to figure out how to make these still be good sunglasses, even though I've done this. I just bought these brand new lenses. And so I went onto eBay and I found the exact same frames. They were black instead of dark blue, which is totally fine with me. So I bought new frames for they were like $49, super cheap. And I was going to take the lenses off of my current ones that were brand new. The reason why these ones were so cheap is because the lenses were completely scratched up. Okay. And I'm like, and then I went on to Amazon and I found like a little glass, like a cheap like glasses repair tool kit thing for $6. So I'm like, all right, you know what? It was a mistake, but I can get out of this thing for like $50. Like I'm going to have my new nice sunglasses with the new lenses and the new set of frames. And then I got the new frames. So I'm like, oh man, they're so, I didn't realize how much bad shape I had treated my poor frames. Like these are really nice. I was ready to swap the lenses over, swap the first lens over, totally fine. Everything was going great. And then the other one, I got one of the screws out on the lens. They were held in by two screws. So I got the first screw out fine. The second screw, I kind of stripped a little bit. And also I stripped my tool that was like the little hex thing to unscrew the lens, to the point where there was like no hope. Like, Nick, there was no hope to get this stupid screw out of this lens.
Having worked with small little tiny screws and small bolts and small screwdriver, I hate it. I hate, they're all soft as hell for some dumb reason that is beyond my understanding. And like they're just like put in there as like a tease that like, oh, you could try to fix this, or you could strip it. You'll just strip it. It's actually 100% of the time you'll just strip it.
Yep. Sorry, so I stripped it.
Yep.
Both at that I like tried to get so careful, but at this point, I mean, my $6 tool, which was like a part of like a 60-piece thing, and I literally was probably made out of tinfoil, just smashed into a mold. Like it was so cheap, and that's the actual screw itself. So I stripped the screw, I stripped the tool. There was no hope that I was going to get it out through traditional means, but I am, if nothing, a stubborn person. And so, Nick, I went through what ended up being like a 2-hour journey. I just want to walk you through just the highlights briefly. So, first thing I did was I cut the frame down so I could maybe try to twist around the actual frame, around the original the lens, like the eyeball side of the lens, so I could try to twist that around. So I cut it down so it was just like a little L. That did nothing. That was completely pointless, but it was kind of satisfying to destroy the frame that I destroyed earlier.
Maybe, I was kind of like hanging in there, like, oh, what's going on? I wonder how this will. Oh, it doesn't do anything. Right,
yeah, it was completely useless. Mostly cathartic, which it's kind of merit in and of itself. But then, Nick, I went a little. At that point, I really wanted it to work, and so I resorted to what some people might think are a little bit dramatic efforts. So, first thing I tried was I had not me. I have a bunch of clamps, like things that are typically used for wood and stuff. And even though it was like maybe half a millimeter to try to clamp onto on the front side, on the lens side, that I had stripped down, I tried to like clamp onto that with some rubber footing things. That didn't work out. Tried doing a couple other things. I tried putting foil and some other stuff onto my stripped out screwdriver thing that I had bought for $6. That didn't work. And then I had an idea. So I was like, you know what? I wonder if I could find something and get it really, really, really hot and then melt off the other side of this lid of the frame.
I suppose.
So I went down that road, and I have a blowtorch that I use for some things, and I got a razor blade from my carpet cutter from when I had to cut carpet once, that I still have. So they're very, very, very sharp, very thin blades. So I knew I could get it really hot. Okay. And I literally went out I didn't know where to put all these things over. So I have like these gloves that you can use with grilling and smoking and stuff that are like fireproof. So I had my fireproof gloves. I was holding onto this, like what looks like a razor blade. I have this torch that I have just going, and I'm just setting it all on my grill because I figure if nothing else, I mean, the grill's okay with hot things. So this will probably be okay.
Sure.
So I went through a process, Nick, of getting this blade very, very hot and then trying to cut it off the screw on the other side of the lens. I'm not sure how good of a picture I'm drawing with my words here, but it was
to cut off, not cut it off.
I'm trying to basically melt off the frame from the screw so that I can just pull the screw through the lens. That's my goal.
That makes sense.
And so I do this, and I do it like 10 times. One time my hand slipped a little bit, and I kind of like scratched the back of the lens a little bit, which ultimately, it was like kind of disheartening because like how many more times am I going to do this? Because at this point I'm causing more of a problem than I'm fixing here. So I actually, Nick, I literally, my glove and a torch and a blade, I melted off this stupid thing, and I managed to get it off, and only one little tiny little nick on the lens itself. And then I realized how these things are manufactured. There's like a little bolt on the backside that ultimately I needed to figure out how to get off. Like, just because I melted off all the plastic part, there still is a bolt inside the plastic part that holds all this together.
Okay.
And so then I did a whole bunch more of clamps and loosening and blah, blah, blah. Eventually got the whole thing back apart and pulled the screw through 2 hours later, put the lens on the new set of glasses, screwed it back in. The nick is like not even noticeable at all. And I'm so proud that I managed to fix it all. It was literally...
I'm proud of you. That's a wild story. Like, I actually think that's kind of incredibly impressive. And dude, you should have documented it on YouTube. Like,
right?
Great.
Yeah, I don't know what I was doing. I mean, there's so many good TikTok, compilation things.
No, actually, I think this would have been a good 8-hour Twitch stream. 2 hours. Just you sitting there, like, you can't really see what's happening. We've got like a close up on it, but we've also got like you in the side thing, and just like you going, damn it.
I literally think like just the memory of standing there with my barbecue glove that is like flame proof, holding a razor blade and then cutting off pieces of plastic off of the inside of a very, very, very tiny thing.
More and more.
Oh man, like the amount of time I spent on that, and like the whole time I'm just wondering like what in God's name am I doing?
But now every time you use those glasses, you're gonna be like, I need to wear these all the time. Let's go.
You know, like literally every time I wear them now, it is like the most satisfying thing. Like even if I only get to wear these like 10 more times, it will still be worth it because Nick, these are the best sunglasses God has ever graced our earth with. Like these
100%. I believe that. I believe that.
These are the most amazing sunglasses.
Can I also say don't break these ones, okay?
yeah, no, for sure. And like that was the funny thing I was thinking about too, is like when I was putting it all back together, I'm like, I wonder if I'm tightening these too much. am I setting myself up for future failure? But here's the thing, I'm not, because I know now to give up immediately. There's no world in which I try to do this again. But also I say that, and I'm a crazy person, so probably will. Nick, I was speaking of ambiguous optimism. I want to talk to you a little bit about my book list. That is a thing that I decided that I wanted to do. So I was talking to Katie, and I was like, I read books and it kind of comes and goes in spurts, and I kind of want to write down what I read. I know people do this, and I was like, even if I just like write out what it is and then give it like a couple sentence summary of what I thought, just
that's what I was gonna say, is make sure you put like a little bit of your thoughts in it, because then you can remember that, right? I agree. I think we don't retain stuff well, like I don't retain
for sure.
Well.
Yeah, well, and I can, sidebar to this, we write down memories for our kids in a journal for both of them separately. Like if there's just like a cute thing that is. And Nick, I'll tell you, we would have forgotten probably 95% of the things in those journals if we didn't write them down.
95% of your children's childhood?
Yeah, that and like that's not to say we don't remember a lot, but like legitimately, like those moments, like the moment to moment things, you do not remember. And I think the same is thing for books and such. Like I care about my kids much more than I do some random book.
I do want to call you out that you said the same is thing for books and such. I assume you meant same is true, like because you're an adult. I know what you're meaning.
Shut up.
But
words is hard.
Words is hard. I agree.
But no, like just in the same way that we're crappy at remembering even our most important things, we're also crappy at remembering books and how they meant things to us, and honestly even what we read. So I went back 3 years and tried to document what all books I have read, and also just type out just a sentence or two about them. And I found it really, really interesting. And one thing that I right away realized, which will be a complete shock to you, is I'm a very streaky reader, meaning like I would go...
No, completely.
I would go huge swaths of time without reading anything. And then I would read like a lot in, a 3-month period.
That does sound accurate.
Yeah, so that is the sort of person that I am, so it's not surprising there. So I guess before I dive, I do want to like toss out some of the facts and the statistics there, because I think it's interesting just to talk about. Have you ever done anything like that? Like, or do you keep a log of anything you've read? Or anything
no,
to that sort?
I had a journal in high school. At like my sister's suggestion, because she had done it for a long time, and I thought it was really interesting going back and reading it. But what I learned with it was I was inconsistent in actually using it, and so it became like a chronicle of like a week or two at a time. Like it would be like a detailed chronicle of like, oh my man, I remember like, oh wow, I forgot about these conversations or what I did here, and then it would be like, again, I wouldn't touch it for a week or two, or I'd forget, or I'd only do it like one day every 5 that I meant to, or whatever. And so I am not great in terms of keeping. I'm just not a person who builds, who is, what's the word I'm looking for? Not habits, not
disciplined in doing stuff like that.
Yeah, especially like creative things or things that don't have that aren't a responsibility. You know what I mean?
Sure.
If it's a responsibility, I'm on top of it. If it's not a responsibility, it's probably gonna fall through the wayside.
Right.
So yeah.
So,
but it seems like a good idea.
Yeah, and honestly, like I'm pretty crap at that too. I want to do better at this because I do think when I do read a lot is some of my best things. And also when I do read a lot, I'm more likely to do stuff like write in those journals that we keep for our kids and stuff like that. Like I'm more likely to give the time of day to things that are what it's like the things that you would just coast and like the habits of your life versus the things that you actually want to that when you look back a year later you wish you would have done. So it's a thing that I want to care more about, and so I wrote out what I did. I think
the word I was looking for earlier was routine. I'm sorry, that's not important.
Yeah.
But
No,
I'm not good about building routines. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I thought this was pretty wild. I guess a couple. I don't want you to like guess numbers of books that I read in any given year, but what do you feel? What's your expected breakdown for physical books versus listening to books versus a digital reading of a physically reading a digital book?
I don't have a good sense of how many digital versus physical you've read because I don't think we talked about Kindle stuff enough for me to know.
Yeah.
But the audio to physical, I'm gonna guess like 75-25 audio.
What before I answer that, what's your feelings on physical versus like a Kindle? Like seeing a digital copy of a physical medium versus just an actual physical medium. Not listening to it, but actually reading it.
I've never really given it a fair shot because I do like having a book, and I like having a book in hand because it takes me away from, I've never tried a Kindle, which would be a good idea, like an actual dedicated e-reader. But, if I had an ebook on my phone, I just know it wouldn't work. And if I had it on a tablet, I'd be more inclined to just tab out every now and then and just like space out. And I enjoy the physical sensation of having a book. And I kind of love the look of a weathered red book, well-read book, So like, I don't know. I'm a little... I'm a nerd at heart, and like I have a bunch of my childhood books that I'm showing the exact type of angsty nerd that I was as a 15-year-old, and I haven't read it in a long time. But my Perks of Being a Wallflower book is like, it's feels like it's been read 14 times.
It's weathered.
Yeah. I don't know if it's 14 times, but it feels like 14 physically.
So do you have like a bookshelf with books that you've bought over the years, or are they kind of transient? Okay.
I do. We actually had a friend make us a bookshelf because he does woodworking stuff, and it's I love it.
So in my office right now, I can look over here. I have a bookshelf behind me. The sad thing about it is it has nothing that has been meaningful to me in the last 15 to 20 years, which is a big bummer. I actually really do love physical books. I will say on my list in the last, since 2020, I have read 2 physical books.
Dang.
And that was to me kind of sad. And I think it's kind of twofold. One, I think the option of reading it, like reading with your eyeballs on a digital device is like impossible for me. Like I just, the likelihood of me carrying a Kindle, like a dedicated device for it is extremely unlikely. And I have read one book on my phone, but like the amount of distractions that comes with is just impossible. And so for me, it's just like that isn't feasible. Like for me to actually have the focus to read a physical book, I need to have the ability to disconnect from all of the distraction and notifications and such. But I've only done that twice intentionally. Intentionally meaning I've only been disciplined enough to do it 2 times in the last since 2020, which I felt I would have guessed I would have done it 5 times. Like that would have been my like off the cuff guess, but unless I'm forgetting a book or here or there, I think I've only done it 2 times.
Dang, that's crazy.
Which is pretty crazy.
So my 75-25 is actually under guessing for audiobooks, right? Because you've listened to a lot of audiobooks.
I am very heavy on audio. Now, do you want to know another thing, which if we talk about it, probably will make sense, but it is embarrassing and jarring. In 2020, Nick, I almost want to give you the shot first to make me feel better.
One book? Is it one?
I listened to 1 book. I've read 0 books physically. For a grand total of 1 book in 2020.
Dang.
Now, I will say you might remember probably why that was, because I went all hard in on listening to an entire backlog of a particular podcast that year in the good year of COVID.
I do remember that.
And so it was not for effort of listening to things, but no books. I listened to one book. Actually, no, I didn't listen to a book. That was one of my 2 physical books I've read in the last year or two and a half years. So going into 2021, I picked it up. I did better than 5 books that year. I read 1 book in print, which was that is the last book that I read in print last year. So spoiler, I've read 0 in print books this year, like physical in print books. I'll tell you what. So it's kind of embarrassing, because as a person who kind of prides himself on this sort of thing, like is a very it's a very small list. So in 2021, I only read 5 books. And 2 of them you're pretty familiar with, because that was the 1984 and Slaughterhouse-Five.
Yep.
So those were some things we'd already talked about.
Absolutely excellent, but
absolutely
also...
excellent. Do you want to take a guess on the split on nonfiction to fiction on those?
On those 5?
On those 5, yep.
3-2, right? Because you didn't read
3-2.
Well, 3-2. 3-2 nonfiction to fiction. I'm assuming that the only 2 fiction were those 2.
Yep, you're 1,000% right. Yeah. Dang, Nick. Good job.
No, I know you. I know you, sir. I do.
Okay, so let's go to 2022. Nick, I can actually hang my hat on this year. I feel much better. This year so far, to date, I've read, from what I could remember anyways, again, I haven't been tracking this as I've done it, but I've read 22 books so far this year. So about one every other week, which is a lot. Like if I could keep that'd be fine. Like I feel good about that. Do you want to take the guess on the split of fiction to nonfiction on this one? I feel like this is a much bigger sample size, so you can maybe try to
I'm thinking
take
like
a stab.
18-4.
Yeah.
Is that right? Let's go! Let's go! Madness!
You didn't say which is which, but I guess you can probably guess.
18 is the nonfiction.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
That's fantastic.
Oh, man. Good job, Nicholas. That's
Thanks,
really
sir.
good. I'm very proud. Do you know what the 4 are? We have talked about them.
So one is Project Hail Mary.
Yep.
Shoot, I should know these. I really should, but I don't have the answer.
So I don't count books that I start and don't finish. So in that realm, I don't count Mistborn, because I tried my best twice.
Tried
my best, quote unquote. So other than that, it was Feed, which is the zombie movie the zombie book that I read. I read half of the sequel and then got distracted, and then I've read 2 of the sci-fi series, the Bobaverse, which I'm on book 3 right now. So those 4 are the 4. Gotcha. But no, yeah. So about a 4 to 18. So whatever that ratio is. But nice. Yeah, that's been my. I just thought it was really interesting to go back and look and like actually realize, like, holy cow, maybe I read another book or 2 in 2020, but I think I maybe only read 1 book. And
oh no.
Obviously that was a weird year for sure, but also I don't think 1 book per year is probably where I want to be at.
No, I mean, it's really hard though, because so you want to be a good productive active reader, but sometimes it's like emotionally and mentally challenging to be at times, right? Like that's why I think I'm streaky, is that there's times that I don't have it in me to like kind of mentally engage with like a full other thing. I'm like, I got stuff going on. I'm like in my zone. I've got to do my own work. I've got to take care of my own responsibilities, and therefore like the reading just falls apart, right?
Well, and I
especially
I think it's very salient, because I think in 2020 that was a year that I just needed to find ways to be happy and laugh, and the answer to that was podcast. And I made no effort to try to like dissuade that like natural bias, because like that made me happy. And that was a time that like even no matter who you were and how affected you were by the pandemic, or what your opinions were, like it was broadly speaking an unhappy time filled with ways to be distracted by how to be unhappy. And so I just took the brain off, please just laugh version of attention seeking, and like I was happy to have it. Like I don't know that I would change it. I needed that at that time. It was the right source for that time. So
right.
But it is a very interesting thing to look back and reflect on, because that is not if you would have told me I read one book in 2020 that I could sign my name to, I would have been like, of course not.
I'll tell you for
I'm
sure.
the sort of person who reads 10 books a year minimum.
Right.
I mean, I'm probably closer to 50 books a year.
I will tell you that I for sure have had years at one. For sure. 100%. Well, let me make you feel better. We'll keep this one brief, but I only audiobooks, and I know there's 3 other books that I've read, but physically, although one of them is actually in here because I did it both on audiobook and on so there's that. Oh, there's 2 that are like that. Okay, well, whatever. Okay. So I have 34 books in my Audible that I know for sure I started after the pandemic. So in the last 2 years and change. 34. Would you like to guess how many of those are nonfiction? Because this is where I'm laughing at myself.
I want to guess
34 books that I've finished, because there's also 1 or 2 in here that I've actually started. One of which I recommend.
So you finished 32 books since 2020.
34. 36 if you count the 2 that I'm thinking of that I've read physically.
I'm going to guess that 2 of them are nonfiction.
4. I got 4 of them. Yeah,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to insult you.
No, you're good. And there is also, I got pretty deep into a short history of nearly everything, but I did not finish it. I actually did.
It's okay.
I think I got like halfway. So I always meant to go back to it, but I never did. And therefore, it should be 35 with 5 of them, and instead my ratio is that much worse for it.
Hey, so one last point on this before we move on. When I was going through this, my wife had said that she thought that I had read more books than her over the last 3 years. Yeah. And I will tell you, the answer is not that.
No.
I think she's a good, strong, like, I would have to go back and do the actual numbers on it, but I think she's a good, strong, like 20 to 30 books per year person.
Good
also,
for her.
100% fiction though. She does not.
Okay.
does not deal with my nonfiction crap.
Well, I think that fiction reading can be just as rewarding at times, especially if you choose good fiction. But also, like, you'll never get the junk food reading that I've. So, like, of my 34, at least like 8 of them are just like pure junk food, and then another like 10 of them are like fantasy series. And I'm like, yeah, no, these are good fantasy series, but they're also like, okay, well, they're fantasy series. Like, there's a difference between reading 1984 Slaughterhouse-5 and reading, freaking the Stormlight Archive series, which was a good fun.
Yeah, I would agree to some extent. Also, though, I think that the worst of books is better than the best of television.
I agree.
Like,
I agree.
Pretty sweeping judgment on that. Nothing against television.
Me neither. I'm literally, when we finish up here, I have to go watch the season finale of something. So there you go. But like, but I also believe I've seen a thing that like, or a study that like literally just reading like regularly makes you a smarter person. Like, it makes you a more critically engaged person or something like that. And I'm forgetting it now because it's, one of those things that you read an article on and then you forget about because you don't critically engage with it enough. And that's me to a T. So,
I mean, I'm 1,000% a better person because of the books I've read. I enjoy the opportunity to hear well-written, peer-reviewed, edited thoughts on things. That's why I love nonfiction so much, is because it's an opportunity for me to challenge myself on things. But also, if I do get sucked into a good sci-fi novel or whatever, I'm also not above that either. Yeah. Okay. Nick, basketball, Bill Russell. Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Part 2.
We'll keep this relatively brief, but
we'll try.
We'll try. We'll keep this relatively brief. Tell me, what do you know about Bill Russell as a basketball player?
He played for the Celtics, yes?
Yes, he did.
And he won 85,000 championships.
You got it exactly right. You won 85,000 championships, which is
right on the nose, right? Which is really hard. Like you have to really time that.
Yeah, actually retired so that you could. Yeah.
Okay. No. Can I actually take the guess at what the actual number was? I think it was. It's 10 or more.
It is 10 or more.
Is it 10 or 12?
It is. It's 11.
Damn
it! That's actually hilarious. But yeah, so Bill Russell won 11 NBA championships,
which is. Can we just pause before we start? That is unthinkably. That is ridiculous. So is that from? Did it start in the 60s, like late 60s?
So early 50s, or sorry, I actually don't know when the NBA started first recording championships and when we first started counting them. I know that it should go back to when it was actually called the Basketball Association of America instead of the NBA.
Yeah.
But I think that was which I think is in 1949. So okay. I don't know if we're counting it back to 1946, which is the founding of the BAA, or if we were counting it going back to 1949. But Bill Russell was drafted in 1956.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So Bill Russell was drafted in 1956. We can do the winning thing real quick here. They won a championship in his rookie year. They lost in his second year. He was injured in the 58 finals. They were tied at 2 games apiece, and he was injured. He had rolled his ankle, I believe, in game 3. I know it was an ankle injury. I think I read that it was a rolled ankle, but I don't have it listed here now, so I'm doubting myself. But he was injured in the 58 in game 3. He missed games 4 and 5 and only played 20 minutes, still hobbled in the deciding game 6. And I think he must have been upset with himself for getting hurt because they won the next 8 in a row.
As you do.
like Jeff, 8 in a row is, that's not very easy, Jeff. 8 in a row, I'm not convinced that I would beat a middle schooler at horse 8 times in a row.
So what? Okay, he was age what from what when he did that?
So he comes into the NBA a little, or I think at 22. At 22. So he wins those from 59 to 66, which would put him at 25 to 33.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know what? I mean, I've strung together some really great 8 years, these last 8 years, which would put me at 33 at the end of them.
See, right now, you should have won. You should have won 9 championships, including 8 in a row, if you were Bill Russell.
Yeah. I will have to go back and tally them up, but I don't think that's what I've done.
You don't think that's what you've done?
That is, I mean, that is an unfathomable amount of championships in any league, in any sport.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. So during this time, that exact stretch, he is the NBA MVP at the time was voted for by other players and coaches, I believe it's just players. I don't have it written down, and now I'm doubting myself again. But either players and coaches, and he won 5 MVPs during that time. Pretty decently okay, I guess. And then they lost in 1967. So in 1967, or the 1966-67 season, Red Auerbach, the Hall of Fame coach, had just retired. And would you like to know who they replaced Red Auerbach with as coach for the Boston Celtics?
I would like to know. Who was it?
They replaced him with Bill Russell.
I've heard of him. From before.
Bill Russell was the player coach for the last 3 seasons of his career, from 1967
Hey, Nick, first off, I did not know that was a thing. Also, has that ever been a thing since?
I actually don't believe so. I didn't look it up. I should have. I don't know of any other examples. Here, let's give it a quick Google.
Because that's literally hey, coach is gone, and then he was like, yeah, sounds good. And then there was just an awkward silence, and they kept playing. And I don't.
Okay. So it had been done a fair amount in the 60s, 70s, and 50s. It's fallen off entirely. The last one is I'm seeing Dave Cowens was the player coach for a season in the 78-79 season.
So not in the last 40 years. We have not seen that.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. At least 42 years. So the 67 playoffs, I'm not going to go into the details of the 67 playoffs, but there are some criticism of him as a player coach, that there's some ideas that he didn't make very smart substitutions because he was focused on playing. He must have taken that to heart. Yeah, I agree. He must have taken that to heart because then he went out and won the next 2 championships as a player coach.
Yeah,
Yeah. So not only is it 11 rings, it's 11 rings in 13 years with an 8-in-a-row stretch, with both of his two failures being kind of understandable why they happened. And like one is an injury in the finals, one is a player coach scenario. And other than that, he just won all of them. And he won 2 as a player coach. Kind of insane. He also there's a really fun stat of so Jeff, Bill Russell played in 10 Game 7s. You know about how hard it is to win a winner-take-all single game with everything on the line. We've watched a lot of Game 7s, and the saying always is with the NBA, anything can happen in Game 7. You get it to 7, anything can happen, right?
Right.
What would you guess Bill Russell's record is in 10 Game 7s in his career?
Well, he couldn't have lost many of them.
True.
How all this works.
Yep.
I would say at most he could lose a couple. But no, I would say a Game 7 doesn't sound like something Bill Russell would lose many of. So I'm going to go with either 0 or 1.
Yeah, you got it the first time. It was 10-0 in Game 7s in his career, which is pretty good. Pretty rude. What's really frustrating to me about that is that a lot of those are against the Lakers, and if you could just stop that, I would appreciate it.
That's before your time, a little bit.
Yes. So Russell is, like, in terms of just winning championships, he's the greatest athlete in team sport history. Like, there's just not really any getting around that. And there's there's a lot more to basketball than that. Oh, but I should mention, the last thing I should mention is that I'm not the type of person who looks to people's high school and college careers, but before joining the NBA, he won back-to-back championships during his last 2 years of high school and back-to-back championships during his last 2 years of college. I believe back then, freshmen weren't allowed to play with the varsity college team, so he didn't have a chance his first year. And he also won an Olympic gold medal. So he was a winner freaking everywhere. Comes to the NBA, instantly wins a championship as a rookie, as a star rookie, and then wins 11 out of 13 overall. Total insanity in terms of just team success. But I think that Bill Russell is a very interesting player all around outside of just being a winner. And I think that's because he's very much a product of his time. Do you know much about like him, his play style, or anything about those Celtics teams at the time?
No, so that's where I was going to ask questions, was mostly around what sort of team was he on and what sort of statistical of an outlier he was, because he has to be some sort of interesting statistical outlier to be the sort of person who can string together, that many championships.
Yes.
And then just like generally where he kind of fits in the overall narrative of players in history. So those are going to be my go-to questions should they become questions I should ask. So that's where I'm at. But I genuinely don't. I feel that this is the part that I feel most criminally underinformed as far as who
most
he
people
was.
are about the 60s players. There's not good footage of them. There's not good stat keeping. There's all this issues with it. You're not alone, and there's nothing weird about it. You kind of have to do extra work to learn about players from like before Magic and Bird. To be honest, like you just won't catch enough stuff. Just being tuned into games. So for our listeners, Bill Russell was a center in the NBA. That's the largest guy on the team. Usually, they're usually the guys who get the most blocks, the most rebounds, and are the guy posting up if they're involved in the offense. Usually speaking, there's a bunch of exceptions of the world, but yeah. So, Bill Russell, you're totally right that he's interesting statistically, because by a counting stat perspective, the 60s were a really weird time, that they had a very, very high pace. There were tons and tons and tons of rebounds all around. Bill Russell, let me pull up the exact number again. I'm sorry, I lost it. But like Bill Russell for his career averaged 19 rebounds a game, but that wasn't like as much of an outlier as it sounds nowadays. I'm sorry, that's incorrect. That's not per game. What am I talking about here? That's he had 22.5 points per game.
I was just looking at that. I'm like, Nicholas, that was over 20 because I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, you're right. 22.5 rebounds per game, which wasn't as much of a statistical outlier because teams just took and missed so many more shots during Russell's era.
Fair.
But Russell's also part of the reason that trend continued, because he was a defensive force who encouraged fast breaks on his team by weirdly, he had a strategy which I don't think can translate any longer in the NBA, of purposefully blocking shots and passing on the block to teammates, like tipping the block to teammates was a direct part of the strategy. And we didn't record block shots back then, but today the best defenders in the league will average somewhere between 3 to 4 blocks a game. There's tallies that Bill Russell averaged, or journalists have gone back and just manually tallied from footage that we have. So obviously this isn't perfect, and it's not comprehensive by any means, and there's a chance for noise and all of this yada yada. I'm prefacing too much, but on about 100 unofficial box scores, Russell tallied around 8 blocks per game during his career and was closer to 9 per contest during his peak season.
Ooh,
which,
that's a few.
Right. The game was really different. It's hard to kind of separate the fact that, you can look at Bill Russell and say, okay, well, he didn't score that much. His team's offenses weren't that great, and his numbers are inflated by his era, but he's a part of that. I mean, having a guy who gets you 8 to 9 blocks a game can encourage a fast break in a different way that you just couldn't get without him. And you can only exist in the format, the time that you exist in as a player. And Russell took the prevailing strategies and played them better than anybody and won out of his freaking mind with them. So I don't really I don't love this desire to be Russell and Wilt played against Milkman or whatever. It's yeah, sure. Everybody wasn't getting paid enough to make NBA a full-time job, and also the league didn't have the same roots that it does now, where 12-year-olds are getting workout programs to make them insane shooters and ball handlers and yada yada. But for the era that he existed in, he was incredibly impactful. He shaped the league and did things like getting 8 or 9 blocks a game, which is a little silly. That's crazy.
I've since you've been doing this, I've just been clicking through random things on the internet, and everything I've read is very much in support of this analysis, Nick. So
yes,
obviously now is the right time to try to look up good Bill Russell things.
Yes,
but yeah, nonetheless, this is very cool.
For anyone looking for a deeper written dive into this, 538 put out a great piece on the day he passed, or the day after he passed, I believe, August 1st. 538 did a piece called "Bill Russell's Trailblazing Legacy is Secure, Even if Stats Can't Measure It." And backpicks.com is a really great resource for historical perspective. Backpicks.com is run by a really popular podcaster who does really, really in-depth deep dives, both film and statistical. And there's a bunch of good discussions out there online as well. Yada, yada, yada. Who cares? Let me give you my summaries of a lot of the stuff that I found and stuff or not summaries. So the interesting part of Russell that I also think is tied to his era, but is interesting from a statistical standpoint, is that Russell basically has, as well as we can measure impact, which is not perfect, and as well as we can measure impact for the 60s, which is also not perfect, Russell's defensive impact is better than any player's offensive impact ever, period. All there is to it. Go ahead. Sorry.
Wow.
You're good.
No, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
Elaborate. What was it that drove that so much?
Yeah. So basically,
besides getting a bajillion blocks a game, which seems useful.
Right. So Russell was a really modern help defender in how he shaded drives, helped at the last minute, and had really good instincts around the rim in terms of help. Because one of the things about being a help defender, which is for people who don't know or whatever, is basically leaving your man to help when someone else has beaten their man or has looks like they could use help or whatever it may be. Part of it is that it's always a balancing act of helping at the right time, trapping somebody if you can, and not leaving your man so open that they'll just get past to and get an easy basket or an easy shot. And Russell had really good instincts in terms of how he stalked the ball, helped at the last minute, helped with his hands wide so that he could deflect passes and obviously block shots, and was also just an insane athlete with a great wingspan, who, so therefore, block shots really well.
Well, and it's a three-point line, so you're talking about all of this, all of the quality shots more or less likely needing to flow through him. Like,
yes.
So if you were ever going to be a big man with a defensive impact, can't ask for a better era than that, because that, like, what a great opportunity to have your fingerprint on a game than those games. So
yes. So besides that, from like a qualitative perspective, you're exactly right. But besides that, from a qualitative perspective, the 60s were also, because there wasn't a 3-point line, they were dominated by centers offensively. Like Wilt Chamberlain's the kind of big example, but there's a lot of others, and not just centers, I guess, power forwards as well. And Backpicks has a really great breakdown if anyone cares about like watching film. I don't think me talking about film and talking about like a qualitative analysis will do it justice, but basically Russell may have also been the best individual defender, like one-on-one defender there, which is like a very different dynamic than being a great team defender. It's probably the difference between being a great safety and a great cornerback. And basically, Russell was the best cornerback and the best safety. So, no big deal.
Not bad.
Sorry, go ahead.
I said not bad. Not bad.
Yeah, not bad. But from like a defensive impact, like from a statistical perspective, before he was drafted, the Celtics were a slightly below league average team on defense. And the moment he was drafted, they became historically dominant. They never went below. I know. They never went below a negative 4 relative defensive rating. So defensive rating is a measure of basically how well you stop teams, or how few points you give up per 100 possessions ish. There's like some other stuff to it, but negative 4 is very, very good.
Okay.
Negative 4 is great, but for his career, they averaged being 6.1 points per 100 possessions better than league average, which is the best stretch for a career of 10 years of any team ever. So statistically, they had the best 10-year stretch of defense ever, and that's not actually even fair, because I only found his career average. So it's his career compared to any other team's best 10 years, which his career was longer than 10 years. So there you go.
Okay, so compared to a more selective group, his is still better. That's crazy.
And the year that he left, the year after his playing days, they went from being about negative 5 to his final season they were over -6 again. And the season he left, they were dead average. They were almost exactly league average. So they went from bad defense, drafted a rookie center, become historically great for 13 years.
Oops, 11 championships.
right.
And back to normal.
Yep. He also has
too freaking Shea. Oh my gosh. That honestly, that sentence alone of like going from below average or average to winning 11 championships out of 13 years to back to where you started, more or less. Oversimplification there. But that is incredible to think of that a person could have that level of impact.
No, you've got it exactly right. It's wild that it's that clean. It shouldn't be that clean, right? Like there should be other factors. It should be like,
a little bit of a lag here and there. But
right. It shouldn't happen the moment you're drafted. You should be like young and not as involved. And no. For Russell, it was all at once, instantly. Besides that, they also, in 1964 and 1965, were the two best defensive teams ever by that metric, the metric of relative to their defensive rating relative to league average. So the two best defenses ever. And he was on 4 of the top 5 and 5 of the top 10 relative defensive seasons in history.
Okay. not bad.
Right.
Bad.
So not only was it consistent dominance, but it was also this peak dominance is otherworldly, and as basically the most that we've seen from a defensive perspective. Obviously, you can't credit all of this explicitly to him, but it is a trend.
Yeah.
And they had an average margin of victory of 8 points during his career, which is kind of nutty and kind of silly. There's a lot of long-term ways that you could evaluate teams. You know about ELO, right? Yeah. So there's people who've done ELO analysis of teams, and by those metrics, theoretically, Tim Duncan's Spurs were just as good over a similar period of time. And
just to anybody who's not familiar, ELO meaning like the better like the better the opponent is that you beat, the higher your rating would go up, and the worse like an opponent is that you would lose against, the more your rating would go down.
Exactly.
To come up with like a comparative analysis of what your score, quote unquote, would be compared to peer. Would that be a fair way to?
Yes, it's a rating system that has like an average and or I don't know if it has an average really. That's not fair. But you have a rating system where your rating goes up relative to your opponent when you win and down relative to your opponent when you lose.
Yeah,
and it's just accumulated over a long period of time. It's what chess uses, right?
Yes,
to like rate
exactly.
rated. Yep. And so it's really well respected because of how it ranks those players over a really long period of time. That ELO is an interesting thing for basketball for a lot of reasons. We don't have to like dive into it super hard, but one of the main reasons that you might not do ELO is because teams just don't care about every single regular season game as much as they care about playoff games. So like, why would it matter as much if you're as dominant during every regular season game? Those arguments have validity and whatever, but it's still an interesting way to look at teams, especially over a long term. And by those metrics, for like a 13-year stretch or 12-year stretch, 13-year stretch, the Celtics are one of the 4 or 5 best teams ever. Yeah. So like theoretically, sure, the Spurs with Duncan, I think it's Magic's Lakers or Kareem's Lakers. I'm not sure if it starts from before Magic was there or not. Have a similar stretch, and Jordan's Bulls have a similar stretch. But it's certainly elite company. It's not the case that like, oh, well, his teams were just good because they were in an era with a lot of... No, they dominated their era just like other all-time greats.
Yeah, and what I like about that is it really is a good... at least in my opinion, a compared to peer metric is going to be oftentimes the really only way you can do the sort of comparison across like multiple decades, because
exactly.
the games change so much, but it's more so like what is the relative dominance of a particular person or team in the situation. So you've done a good job so far, Nick. Many of these are all that exact thing of comparative dominance to those around him at the time.
Well,
so I like it.
I'm completely with you, and I think that's the only way to like really look at players across time, like you're saying. And I mean, even in a lot of ways in the same era, it's hard to really compare without like normalizing or thinking about the context of the world that they're in, right? So
yeah.
So essentially, freaking Russell's impact was incredible, consistent, and what was interesting is also this impact seems to hold up to when teammates were out. So we don't have on-off data. But when his teammates miss time, for example, Bob Cousy is a long time... when he came into the league, the Celtics were already a decent team. They had Bob Cousy, who is one of the first great point guards of the league. In 1958, so that's Russell's second season, Cousy sat for 7 games, and the Celtics played far better without him. In 59 and 60, Bill Sharman, Bob Cousy, and Tom Heinzen, all stars their own right, missed a few games, and the machine kept on ticking. And I'm quoting from backpicks here. In 61, Sharman missed 18 games, and the Celtics were again better without him. In 62, Cousy missed 5, and again, the Celtics were better without him. Bill Russell missed 4 games in 1962, and Boston's point differential fell by 22 points.
Oh, no. Oh, my gosh.
Yes.
That's significant a bit.
It's 22 points change for our listeners is the difference between like the best team of all time and the worst team of all time. Is if you start it spelled by
man, that's crazy.
That's too small of a sample, but Bill Russell was also kind of an Iron Man and didn't really miss time, so it's hard to evaluate how his team did without him. I believe that his team went from that average margin of victory of 8 to an average margin of victory over his career. I believe it was to just about average. They missed him for 24 games in his rookie season, and they still were an above-average team. But for his career, he missed very little, and so it's kind of hard to compare him without. But the team, no matter what happened with injuries and roster change, because in the 50s and 60s, players didn't have as long of careers. They came straight out of college. The nutrition and training wasn't as good, and players retired young. So a lot of players didn't. There was a lot of turnover over his career, and the fact is that like defensively they just continued ticking, and their margin of victory kept ticking. Whether after Kuzi's retirement, after Red Auerbach's retirement, after several other critical players' retirements, and through their injuries. The team was successful, didn't really matter who was around him. And the limited data we have without him, with him hurt, is to say that they lost their only championship they played with him missing any time, and they dropped to about an average team statistically when he wasn't there from a great team. So as far as I could tell, all impact metrics basically point to, yeah, this guy was insane. This guy was absolutely cream of the crop elite. There's a lot of interesting discussion about. Sorry, before, I could wrap it up here, but do you have like any thoughts or questions for me on like I've mostly talked about impact because I don't know how to talk about defending and rebounding really well, except to say that he was an explosive athlete. He stalked the ball. He had great instincts. Yeah.
I don't really have any like I guess. I mean, I would be able to talk about this sort of thing for forever, but we don't have for forever.
Yes, that's the thing.
I guess kind of in the back of my mind, maybe this is a little bit of a petty outsider fan sort of question. But just we've talked about where like you rank players of all time. I would feel a little bit remiss without at least asking that.
Totally.
And maybe you can give like a floor and ceiling of like where you would place him, kind of just depending on, I don't know, the day of the week and the weather and stuff. So
what I've realized myself recently is that like, you know, if I were to do a list, Nick Ager is a fan who's really engaged, but who doesn't have a comprehensive way of like trying to judge these guys and hasn't done comprehensive work on all of them, or like analysis or, you know, insight into them. Haven't like tried to do any. Yeah. So any like ranking system of like a full, you know, like what are my top 10 in order? I think it's going to be like really littered with mistakes, not just biases, but like mistakes. And
I think that's a fair thing to say. Genuinely, I do think that that's totally fair.
Right. If I was a publication and I could do all the work, then cool. If I was a statistical model, like I respect even statistical models that I disagree with. I don't think that they're wrong to put out like, you know, what their greatest is, and people who use a statistical model, because there's a lot of like journals or websites that have their own metrics and stuff. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that because they have a system. Even if I think their system isn't perfect, at least that like I respect that they have a way of like trying to objectively analyze. And I don't have that. But what I would say is I do have like instincts on like where I feel about things. Like there's players I'm higher on, there's players I'm lower on. Jordan is to me like kind of unassailable. But the best arguments I've heard against Jordan are Bill Russell, and they're basically just, okay, you can discount his offense if you like, but his offense was still good. There's a lot of interesting discussion online about whether or not Bill Russell's offense was an overall good or an overall like kind of average or slightly below average. He was a below average scorer for sure, just in terms of like how efficient he was and how many points he put up. But he was a big team player who was a really good passer and a really smart passer. And the Celtics offense ran through him as a passer kind of ahead of its time a lot of the time. Sorry,
I'll put you to it. So let's just
I'll do it. If I was gonna put him somewhere, I'd put him shortly after Jordan, Kareem, and LeBron. And a lot of the stuff I've seen online that I like, a lot of the lists that I've seen online that I really like and respect, that have like a lot of work done and work that I think the analysis is really good, have him at 4, and I think that's perfectly fair. I think 4th all time is a perfectly fair place to think of him. I think you could probably like if you're really low on like, okay, I don't believe that defensive impact translates across eras. I don't believe that the offense is actually good. I think it's like average. I think I could see a place where you put him like 9. Like I don't really see a reasonable argument for. I mean, personally, I don't see a reasonable argument for a couple of these centers who are like in that range to be over him. But I do get the logic behind it. So I'd say anywhere from like 2 to 9, and like my instinct is 4th after Jordan, Kareem, LeBron.
I think that's fair. Because like you do get into some really weird comparisons across different generations of players when you get into other more modern centers with, with Shaq and Tim Duncan and etc. Like, well, honestly, even of his own time, Wilt, depending on how you value Wilt's scoring ability. So, gets interesting. I do agree though. So you did put Kareem ahead, like kind of regardless. Which probably would be fun to talk about regardless, because I also think that he's probably one of the least talked about, most dominant sports people of all time.
I completely agree with that.
Sorry, go ahead.
The other thing I was going to say is that like a lot of eras are kind of defined by guys at the absolute top, and I think those guys are kind of unassailable, whether or not, like, if you say like Kobe and KG are actually like 12th or 13th best all time, there's a lot of people who feel that way. Okay, whatever. I don't really care. Kobe, KG, and Duncan defined the 2000s.
Right.
And Russell and Wilt defined the 60s. Full stop. Nobody else did. They were absolutely the peak of the time, and I think that like kind of to me is like my metric. If Bill Simmons did a book that is kind of funny, and it's, he's not like he himself would say he's not like the best analyst ever, but he did a book where he did different tiers of players, and to me, if I had to do tiers, I'm pretty wishy-washy, but I would probably be like, okay, well, I would want a tier of like, these are the guys who were so good that they dominated their era in such a way that you can't think of the game without them there, and like it's clear that they were dominating that era, and there's no way that you could ever exclude Bill Russell from that list. He was,
I mean, 1,000,000%.
Right. He absolutely defined the 60s and the late 50s for that matter.
I mean, just in the same way that I think if you think of like the 2010s, I mean, that is
LeBron's era. It sucks. I hate it. But it's LeBron's era.
It's LeBron and Steph though. Like it's LeBron and Steph. I mean, 100%. I mean, you could probably make a case like, KD had some very good years in there. But like to me, like when I look back on that, that's going to be LeBron dominating and making all the headlines, and also Steph being the most electric 3-point shooter we've ever seen ever.
Totally. The reason I even brought this up originally is it was like Russell for the 60s and Kareem absolutely for the 70s. Like there's not even another name except for Dr. J, and Dr. J was doing it in the ABA, which is like a whole weird world. And I am really high on Dr. J. Just like I think he's underrated in the grand scheme of things, but Kareem kind of single-handedly. Sorry, I'm the worst. Single-handedly dominated the 70s, and that's a big thing. Like, I could see a world where you could, or not see a world. Impact metrics might even feel might be some impact metric arguments for Russell over Kareem. I talked today mostly about like defensive rating and relative defensive rating, but there's a lot of different defensive metrics out there. For example, like defensive win shares, which is kind of an older impact metric, also sees Russell as the best defender ever, and like disproportionately so. So there's a lot of different ways you can look at this stuff, and I don't want to go into the nitty gritty of those because they're really minute with like minute criticisms, and like it's hard to really dive in on.
Oh man, this has been fun. Nick, thank you so much for taking us on a 2-episode odyssey about Bill Russell stuff. And man, nothing is more fun than talking to you about NBA things. You're definitely
except talking to you about Formula One and football stuff, which I also love.
Typically off air, but not always. And speaking of which, it is both Formula One season and NFL season, and I guarantee you that will be a common topic on our Patreon podcast, which you can check out patreon.com/TiWasap.
You can also follow us at TiWasap on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, but not Snapchat. And you can find all of that at TiWasap.com.
And that's a wrap, Nick. Thank you so much for potting with me.
You are welcome, sir. This has been the year we started the podcast. Thank you all for listening.